Good evening and welcome to Novara Live. I'm Ash Sarkar and tonight I'm joined by Kieran Andrieu. Kieran, they've never let us host together before. Why do you think they've tried so hard to keep us apart here at Novara Towers?
I have no idea, Ash. It's astonishing to me that it's taken this long for this pairing to happen. Maybe too much lightning in a bottle. Who knows? Anyway, very happy to be here with you. Hopefully the first of many.
Lightning in a bottle, or I kind of think of it as a Liam and Noel Gallagher kind of dynamic. Like, yes, there'll be moments of brilliant creativity, but also some guitars might get smashed over people's heads. Anyway, stay tuned for all of that. Coming up tonight, the MAGA fallout over the Epstein files continues. The previously banned Gaza Documentary finally sees the light of day, and more Palestine Action supporters were arrested over the weekend. So, like I said, stay tuned for all of that and more. If you'd like to support our work, you can sign up at novaramedia.com/support. As ever, you can tweet using the hashtag Novara Live. You can also share your thoughts with us using the super chat function. Now, before we really get cracking with the show, we have an event coming up that you simply won't want to miss. For our next Downstream IRL, I'll be in conversation with historian William Dalrymple about how the East really made the West. So join us at 7 p.m. on the 29th of July at Earth Theatre Hackney. You'll find a link to tickets in the description. Make sure to let us know your comments throughout the show. Everyone knows that the golden rule of politics is to under-promise and over-deliver. And that's doubly the case when it comes to saying you'll release incriminating information relating to convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein, whether other powerful and high-profile individuals were involved in his offences, and if his 2019 suicide was, shall we say, less than consensual. Unfortunately, senior figures in the MAGA movement close to Donald Trump didn't get the message. Last week, the US Department of Justice and the FBI released a memo after investigators reviewed more than 300 gigabytes of digital material and physical evidence. Here's what they said. This systematic review revealed no incriminating client list. There was also no credible evidence found that Epstein blackmailed prominent individuals as part of his actions. We did not uncover evidence that could predicate an investigation against uncharged third parties. They also state, quote, that after a thorough investigation, FBI investigators concluded that Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide in his cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York City on August 10th, 2019. So, the DOJ and FBI say there's no client list, no evidence of a blackmail operation, no evidence of foul play in Epstein's death, and no further disclosure from what's become known as the Epstein files. This is important because it's long been a demand from the MAGA movement to release the Epstein files in full. Here's then Vice Presidential candidate J.D. Vance on Theo Von's podcast just 8 months ago.
Everybody in politics has a vice that's much worse than alcoholism is the way that I put it. But we
release the list.
Seriously, we need to release the Epstein list. That is an important thing.
US President Donald Trump also promised to declassify the Epstein files last year, though he was a little bit more circumspect than his running mate. Here's what he said to Fox and Friends host Rachel Campus Duffy. I guess I would declassify the Epstein files. I think that less so because you don't want to affect people's lives if it's phony stuff in there, because it's a lot of phony stuff with that whole world. Side note, Fox News actually edited out Donald Trump's hedging in their original broadcast, probably because they knew it wouldn't go down well with their audience. But it's Attorney General Pam Bondi who's attracted most of the American right's ire. And that's because just last February, she claimed that Epstein's client list was actually on her desk and ready to review. Pretty awkward then, that the official line coming from the Trump administration is that there is no client list at all. You can see the problem for Pam. Either everything you used to say about a client list and a cover-up was a load of horseshit, or everything the government has to say now about it is horseshit. And you're up to your neck in it. And here's a little tidbit from The Telegraph. Pam Bondi fed a monster, said Matthew Bartlett, a Republican operative who worked for the first Trump administration in the State Department. And now there's a chance that the monster eats her. Speaking of monsters, last Friday, conservative media personality Megyn Kelly appeared at a Turning Point USA event in Florida, debuting a brand new face and some thoughts about the Epstein files.
I've got to be honest, I blame Pam Bondi. I'll tell you why, okay? I have nothing, yes, incompetence, yes. She is the reason that things are unraveling around this story right now that virtually all of the Republican Party cares deeply about. It's also true that Dan Bongino and Kash Patel had questions about Epstein before they took office, okay, before they went into the FBI. But once they joined the FBI, they said nothing. They've kept their mouths shut about Epstein. You have not seen them, except for one joint appearance with Dan and Kash on Fox, running all over the media looking for attention on this, yes, clickbaity story. Who have you seen? Pam Bondi. She has never missed an opportunity to go on television and dangle sweet nothings that might be coming your way. Try to lead you to believe that she's got it, it's on her desk, it's coming tomorrow, you're gonna see something on Epstein. And it was a tease. So you either believe that Pam Bondi was telling the truth then, or that she's telling the truth now, but both cannot be true.
The line that MAGA influencers feel they have to tread here is really quite interesting. It's not the king who's corrupt, it's his bad ministers. Indeed, the ministers are now scrapping amongst themselves to make sure that it's someone else who carries the can. FBI Director Kash Patel was forced to deny resignation rumours over the weekend, and Deputy FBI Director Dan Bongino has apparently been trying to sacrifice Pam Bondi in order to appease disgruntled Trump supporters. Here's what the Daily Beast has to say. Bondi locked horns with FBI Deputy Director Dan Bongino at the White House on Wednesday, where Bongino took her to task for over-promising and under-delivering on the Epstein files. Bongino failed to show up to work on Friday and had threatened to quit over the row. It's me or her, Bongino said, according to Axios. She goes, or I go. Why does Bongino want Bondi out so badly? Maybe it's because she's not the only one whose story switched up in recent months. This is from Axios. At the center of the argument, a surveillance video from outside Epstein's cell that the administration released, saying it was proof no one had entered the room before he killed himself. The 10-hour-long video had what has widely been called a missing minute, fueling conspiracy theories in MAGA's online world about a cover-up involving Epstein's death. The missing minute, authorities say, stemmed from an old surveillance recording system that goes down each day at midnight to reset and record anew. It takes a minute for that process to occur, which effectively means that 60 seconds of every day aren't recorded. Bongino, who had pushed Epstein conspiracy theories as a MAGA-friendly podcast host before President Trump appointed him to help lead the FBI, had found the video and touted it publicly and privately as proof that Epstein hadn't been murdered. Now, normally, Trump doesn't seem to mind too much when his underlings in the administration are fighting between themselves. But this time, he seems to be, as the kids like to say, crashing out. In a lengthy post on Truth Social, Donald Trump forcefully came out in defense of Attorney General Pam Bondi. What's going on with my boys, and in some cases, gals? They're all going after Attorney General Pam Bondi, who is doing a, all caps, fantastic job. We're on one team, MAGA, and I don't like what's happening. We have a, all caps, perfect administration, all caps again, the talk of the town, and, air quotes, selfish people are trying to hurt it. All over a guy who never dies, Jeffrey Epstein. All over a guy who never dies. I guess he's on the same island as Princess Diana and Tupac Shakur. Anyway, not satisfied with all caps and creative use of quotation marks, Donald Trump even claimed that the Epstein files were a bogus distraction cooked up by his political opponents. For years, it's Epstein over and over again. Why are we giving publicity to files written by Obama, crooked Hillary, Comey, Brennan, and the losers and criminals of the Biden administration, who conned the world with the Russia hoax, 51, scare quotes, intelligence agents, scare quotes and all caps, the laptop from hell, and more. They created the Epstein files just like they created, all caps, the fake Hillary Clinton, Christopher Steele dossier that they used on me, and now my so-called friends are playing right into their hands. Why didn't these radical left lunatics release the Epstein files? If there was anything in there that could have hurt the MAGA movement, why didn't they use it? He finished by once more reaffirming his faith in Pam Bondi. Oh my God, there's so many caps in this. Let Pam Bondi do her job. She's great. The 2020 election was rigged and stolen, and they tried to do the same thing in 2024. That's what she is looking into as AG, and much more. 1 year ago, our country was dead. Now it's the hottest. He's got all caps and also scare quotes for that. The hottest country anywhere in the world. Let's keep it that way and not waste time and energy on Jeffrey Epstein, somebody that nobody cares about. Thank you for your attention to this matter. The hottest country in the world. I don't know if he's talking about climate change or, the prevalence of good-looking people, but either way, the man's funny. You can't deny it. Anyway, this appears to be one of the rare moments when Donald Trump himself has appeared to misjudge the mood of his most diehard supporters. Jeffrey Epstein, far from being somebody that, quote, nobody cares about, is a really important issue for the MAGA faithful. Trump's post supporting Pam Bondi and poo-pooing the Epstein files was the first time he was ever ratioed on Truth Social. And indeed, 2 polls show his approval levels having dropped compared to last month. Kieran, this is a real test of MAGA's deference to the man himself, Donald Trump. How vulnerable do you think he is?
Well, we keep seeing these kind of hairline fractures emerging in the MAGA movement. First over Israel and Gaza, then over Israel and Iran, even more so. And now over this. So far, unfortunately, they remain only hairline fractures. But I think it's the longer that Trump is in power, one would assume that the likelihood for serious rupture around this kind of stuff increases. I think fundamentally, Ash, what this speaks to is the danger, from Trump's point of view, the danger of being an elected politician who peddles conspiracy theories as a way of forming, building, expanding, and energizing a coalition, an electoral coalition or a base, right? So once you start rubbing the magic lamp called conspiracy theory, you never know which genie is going to emerge or whether you're going to be able to put it back in. So on the one hand, conspiracy theories are like great if you want to appeal to a disaffected country that has lost faith in its political class, lost faith in its kind of cultural establishment, media establishment, and so on. On the other hand, it's a dangerous game to play if you're Donald Trump, because although he was a genuine political outsider, relative political outsider 10 years ago, he's also been a kind of celebrity business magnet for 5 decades. And you would assume kind of around the block and has lots of skeletons in his closet of that variety, at least. And so, whether there is a genuine conspiracy surrounding Epstein's death, what's contained in the books and otherwise, I think fundamentally what we're seeing is the kind of collision of 2 forces that have previously, up until this point at least, worked very, very well for Trump, i.e., on the one hand, conspiracy theories and sort of feeding MAGA with conspiracy theories. And on the other hand, his status as a kind of glamorous celebrity who can move very easily among non-political elites.
Now, obviously, as journalists, we can't speculate on what's in files that we haven't seen. But there are some things in the public record that are pretty disconcerting. Donald Trump, who was found liable by a jury of sexually assaulting E. Jean Carroll, used to be quite proud of his association with Jeffrey Epstein. This is from a 2002 profile of the financier in a New York magazine. Epstein likes to tell people that he's a loner, a man who's never touched alcohol or drugs, and one whose nightlife is far from energetic. And yet, if you talk to Donald Trump, a different Epstein emerges. I've known Jeff for 15 years. Terrific guy, Trump booms from a speakerphone. He's a lot of fun to be with. It is even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side. No doubt about it, Jeffrey enjoys his social life. It wasn't all one-sided when it comes to the friendship either. This is an audio recording of Jeffrey Epstein himself speaking to Trump biographer Michael Wolff in 2017.
So how do you know this? That was close to straight.
So just in case you couldn't make out the audio, I was Donald's closest friend for 10 years. Kieran, how much do you think that self-preservation is coming into Trump's calculation when he's weighing up whether or not to defend Pam Bondi?
Well, Trump doesn't have a very good track record, a very noble track record of defending people out of loyalty or principles. And actually, he doesn't even have a very good record of defending them as a part of a face-saving exercise. He's shown himself uniquely, I think, willing to throw people under the bus, people that he'd been up until very recently very closely associated with. So, take your pick: Mike Pence, his former vice president, Anthony Scaramucci, his former head of comms, Sean Spicer, Rex Tillerson, John Bolton. There's just an endless list of names of people that as soon as they are disposed of, he's very, very happy to say all kinds of insulting things about, which, most other politicians would kind of leave them with questions to answer. But as you kind of referenced earlier, Ash, Trump is so kind of effective at this sort of Lutheran trick of saying it's not God that's degenerated, it's the church and the clergy. And he seems to manage to, his base is so susceptible to that he seems to manage to get away with it virtually every time. So I think based on all of that evidence and experience, we can probably say that the only reason he's defending Pam Bondi is because he thinks it's in his direct interest.
Before we move on to our next story, I just want to let you know that it is incredibly warm in the studio, like incredibly, incredibly muggy. And if you are in need of a cool, breathable new t-shirt or cap to protect you from the summer glare, well, we might just have the thing for you. One way to support Novara Media is through buying merch from our shop. And all the profits of books, t-shirts, or bags go directly to funding Novara Media's journalism. If you can be tempted by a bit of conspicuous consumerism, go to shop.novaramedia.com to see what we've got. And our very handsome merch manager, Tom, makes sure all the products on the shop are as ethical as they can be. I just want to say that was already in the auto cue. I didn't write that, so I detect the meddling hand of Tom Clements in writing my script copy there. Anyway, even though we all know there's no such thing as ethical consumption under capitalism, you do still need to wear t-shirts. And all of these ones have had their profits directed to Novara Media. They're ethically produced and look, they look great. If they can make us look good, they're gonna be fine for you. 30 to 70% of anything you buy goes directly to sustaining and developing our work. The rest covers the costs of making the products themselves. They're made with eco-friendly inks, organic cotton, plastic-free embroidery, and they're all at a fair price, and they range in sizes from extra small to 5 times extra large. There are also books, including those written by Novara staff like me and by Aaron, as well as by our illustrious downstream guests. And whatever you buy, it's posted to you in recyclable packaging. So visit shop.novaramedia.com. Gaza, Doctors Under Attack, is an investigation into Israeli attacks on hospitals, doctors, and other medical workers in Gaza over the course of the last 20 months. You've probably heard of it. Before it was acquired by Channel 4, it was the subject of intense conflict over whether it should see the light of day at all. Despite being commissioned by the BBC, the broadcaster suddenly axed the film, leading to widespread criticism. Amongst those taking the BBC to task was former Match of the Day presenter Gary Lineker, who said the corporation should hold its head in shame. Now, a new article in The Observer has laid bare some of the political acrobatics the corporation went through before censoring the documentary. Written by the programme's producer Ben DePere and its presenter Ramita Navai, it offers a glimpse of the backroom wobbles and external pressures that led the BBC to pull the film. According to Depere and Navai, the documentary was originally commissioned by Panorama in 2024, before being dropped after they were told that executives at the top of BBC News were, quote, very jumpy and paranoid about Gaza. BBC I, the corporation's investigatory unit, then agreed to continue its development. But during lengthy script meetings, meant to ensure compliance with BBC standards, there were some odd comments made by BBC editors. In one meeting, a BBC editorial policy representative is alleged to have said that a UN report on hospital attacks cited in the film should not be included because, quote, the UN is not a trusted independent organisation. The same is alleged to have been said repeatedly about Amnesty International. Depere and Navai also say they were encouraged to use recorded testimony from 2 Palestinian doctors obtained by Israel while they were detained and allegedly tortured. Depere and Navai refused, explaining that the use of interviews with prisoners under duress is a breach of the Geneva Convention, as well as the Ofcom Broadcasters Code. Then there was this from the article. Script meetings were also dominated by references to what Collier might say, referring to David Collier, a social media activist who had discovered the omissions of the previous film, the film that was published by the BBC and then got taken down. In one editorial meeting, after viewing our film for the first time, a senior BBC reporter told us we should not use certain information, as this would not be acceptable to Camera, a pro-Israel media monitoring organisation. So, as I said, there's a reference there to another BBC documentary that was pulled off the air after Collier and others attacked it. The broadcaster pulled the film Gaza, How to Survive a War Zone, after a coordinated attempt to discredit it over, amongst many things, the fact that its 13-year-old narrator was the son of a Hamas political official. And I just want to linger on this for a second, because I've never once heard the BBC or any other mainstream news organisation in the UK interrogate the political or military connections of any of the October 7th victims. The fact that some of the hostages were serving IDF soldiers has never been invoked as a reason to dismiss either their testimony or the testimony of their families. But when it's a Palestinian child who didn't have any control over which family he was born into, there's a totally different standard applied. So we mustn't trust what he has to say about the daily realities of starvation and bombardment, but we do have to trust what IDF soldiers say about being held hostage. Now, as far as I'm concerned, the same editorial standard should apply. Now, the political connections of that boy also appear to be used by the BBC to downgrade the role of Ramita Navai, who has no connection to Hamas. In May, the BBC had all but shelved the documentary, but then offered this proposal. After 2 months of inadvertently leading us on, their words, one of the executives in this May meeting laid out a plan for a possible solution, to downgrade Ramita's role as correspondent to that of a contributor or third-party reporter. The executive said the problem with the earlier film How to Survive a War Zone was its narration by a child whose father was a Hamas official. So we asked, are they comparing Ramita, our narrator, an award-winning investigative journalist, to the 14-year-old son of a Hamas minister? After a moment's silence, they seemed to realise how ludicrous this comparison was. Eventually, we were told some of Ramita's tweets had been one-sided. There had been too many retweets of posts made by organisations reporting the deaths and suffering of Palestinians, and not enough supportive of the other side, they said. According to the authors, multiple sources within the BBC said the decision to downgrade Ramita Navai had come from both the top of BBC News as well as the top of the BBC itself. In April, the authors say the BBC had confirmed to them that the film would not be shown. But in June, Navai appeared on Radio 4's Today programme to discuss Israel's war with Iran, where she said this.
What do you make, Rami, of the pitch that Netanyahu made to the Iranian people? He said, we, the people of Israel, we're not in argument or in conflict with you, the people. We're in conflict with a regime. How's that idea that there is a fundamental difference between the regime and the people of Iran gone down with your family and friends in Iran?
Well, there is a fundamental difference between the regime and the people. And, it's a numbers game. Figures, stats show us that. So let's say there's probably about 20% of the country are hardcore supporters, and that's probably generous. I would say that the first few days, Iranians were scared and apprehensive, but there was definitely a feeling of hope and excitement that this could be the downfall of the Islamic regime. There were loads of funny memes about the killings of regime officials, but that really quickly changed into fear as ordinary Iranians started to get killed and injured. And now there have been hundreds of, civilians who've been killed and injured. And let's not forget, the reality of what's happening really started to hit home, and that's that Israel is doing it. And the world's been watching as Israel's become a rogue state that's committing war crimes and ethnic cleansing and mass murdering Palestinians. That hasn't exactly been reassuring.
Later in the interview, presenter Amal Rajan picked Navi up on those comments.
Rami, I should say, there's a lot of people listening who obviously take very strong issue with your characterisation of what Israel is doing in Gaza. But would you, and the idea that it's war crimes or ethnic cleansing, I understand that's your opinion.
First of all, that isn't my opinion. I've been investigating it for a year and a half, actually, for a documentary for the BBC, investigating Israel's war crimes. So that is an opinion. I've collected lots of evidence of that.
Just a day later, on the 20th of June, the BBC announced that Gaza Doctors Under Fire would never be broadcast. That's a full 2 months after Depere and Navi say they'd already been told it was being shelved. A BBC spokesperson said this: "We tried very hard to find ways to tell the doctor's stories on our platforms, despite the ongoing Peter Johnston review and our concerns about some of Ms. Navi's social media activity. However, after she appeared on the Today programme and called Israel, quote, a rogue state that's committing war crimes and ethnic cleansing and mass murdering Palestinians, end quote, it was impossible for the BBC to broadcast the material without risking our impartiality." Now, the BBC spokesperson mentioned the Peter Johnston review there. That was an investigation into whether the aired, then pulled film Gaza Surviving a War Zone breached the BBC's editorial guidelines. Today, this report has finally come back. It'll come as zero surprise to learn that it's found that the BBC did breach its guidelines by failing to disclose that the father of the 14-year-old narrator had a role within the Hamas government. Of course, that justifies the BBC's decision to pull it, but it's very much a technicality. Elsewhere in his report, Johnston says this: "I do not consider that anything in the narrator's scripted contribution to the programme breached the BBC standards or due impartiality. I've also not seen or heard any evidence to support a suggestion that the narrator's father or family influenced the content of the programme in any way." In which case, why does it matter? In fact, Johnston found just one breach of the guidelines in his entire report. The identity of the narrator's father should have been revealed. And he stresses that nowhere in the film did the BBC's precious impartiality get breached. So why can't the film be broadcast again, this time with a notice revealing the narrator's family background? Well, it just won't be. And that's because the furore over Gaza How to Survive a War Zone, just like the BBC's censorship of Gaza Doctors Under Fire, was never about the facts, and not even about impartiality. It's about a powerful pro-Israel lobby that gets to decide what you and I can see, read, and hear. Speaking of which, To Kill a War Machine is an independent documentary on proscribed group Palestine Action, the first domestic direct action protest group to be banned as a terrorist organisation by a British government. It was made by two filmmakers operating under the name Rainbow Collective, whose films highlight human rights issues. But if you try to access the documentary in the UK, now you get this. Filmmaker's statement on To Kill a War Machine. Following the vote in the House of Commons on the 2nd of July 2025 to prescribe Palestine Action, Rainbow Collective have taken the difficult decision to temporarily take down the online version of our film To Kill a War Machine and authorise no further screenings of the film until further notice. As filmmakers with 20 years of experience documenting movements for social justice around the world, we produced To Kill a War Machine independently, within the law, and had it certified for cinema release by the BBFC. The film itself does not become illegal, as it was produced and edited prior to prescription. However, future distribution of anything which could be interpreted as showing sympathy for or inviting support for a prescribed organisation will become illegal. Kieran, I know I shouldn't be surprised, but I can't help but get wound up when I hear about this stuff. How did pro-Israel lobbyists like David Collier, like Camera, end up dictating BBC editorial policy? Isn't the job of the BBC to weigh the case on the objective merits and then go, scream at us if you want, ultimately we stand by our decision-making?
There's something about, maybe because I've had a lifetime, as now we probably all feel like we have, of listening to pathological, lying Israeli government spokespeople, but I'm kind of inured to that. There's something about the sort of faux universality, faux felicity or something of Amal Rajan and the BBC kind of passive voice that just drives me completely insane. But anyway, that's a separate thing. It's interesting to watch the evolution of Israeli Hasbara or Israeli propaganda in real time. For a very long time, Israel focused on projecting an image of itself to the world as a kind of romantic place, as an almost kind of mythological place, sort of Western, but with antique and exotic features. Whenever the inconvenient truth or the inconvenient question of the Palestinians came up, which before 1982 was virtually never, the Hasbara machine would kind of switch gears and go into nasty mode. And nasty mode always kind of operated on two frequencies. Number one, these people are terrorists. Number two, you're an anti-Semite. And what's interesting to me, with the kind of near universal collapse of the idea of Israel as a sort of romantic place in the kind of global public imagination over the past 15, 20 years, is that the Israeli propaganda machine has very palpably shifted almost sort of 24/7. Of course, it still has its tourism campaigns and so on, but so much of the resources of the kind of machinery of Israeli cultural hegemony, if you like, have shifted towards the nasty mode. So either you're anti-Semitic or these people are terrorists, right? So up until about 10 years ago, the approved scarecrow of Israeli propaganda was anti-Semitism. And of course, it was very effective at ensuring that there was never a Labour government led by Jeremy Corbyn. I think after 21 months of a kind of live streamed genocide, that scarecrow is no longer sufficient. And so very clearly what happened fairly early on in the genocide was a shift to these people are terrorists. And obviously in the present iteration, that becomes Hamas. And I think it's pretty obvious that kind of, that's what's happened with the BBC. That's what's happened with these documentaries. It's a kind of institutional capture on that basis.
I mean, just before we move on, I want to point something out. So Lisa Nandy today, after the report came out and highlighted this single breach of editorial policy, she came out and said, how's no one resigned? You know, how's no one been fired at the BBC? I've been saying that for ages. She had absolutely nothing to say when a Centre for Media Monitoring report found that per fatality, Israeli deaths get 33 times more coverage than Palestinian deaths. And not only that, emotive language like, barbarous, like massacre, that is exclusively used for Israeli deaths, whereas much more neutral and passive sounding language is used for Palestinians killed by the IDF. And it goes to show that there is such an imbalance of power and access to power. So if you're a pro-Israel lobbying organization, it could be Camera, it could be the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, it could be UK Lawyers for Israel, it could be individuals like David Collier. If you make complaints, it doesn't matter how spurious they are, They will not only get listened to and trigger all sorts of internal investigations at the BBC, it will get huge amounts of media coverage as well. But if you are an organisation associated with the British Muslim community, like the Centre for Media Monitoring, you will be roundly ignored. So it doesn't matter that they've done the research and they found a persistent pattern of bias. I mean, you'd think that that would be of concern to the BBC News head honchos and the BBC Corporation head honchos. That can be safely ignored because no one cares about bias against Palestinians. No one cares about bias in favor of Israel. That's a totally acceptable breach of impartiality, right? That's fine if it breaches the BBC editorial codes. It's never going to actually be enforced. There is only, the selective enforcement at the behest of these pro-Israel lobbying organizations. And I think that anyone who works in journalism who has a modicum of self-respect should tell these organizations to go fuck themselves, right? Quite frankly, they should all be told to go fuck themselves. Sorry if you're listening with kids, but it does just really, really wind me up. Let's move on. Unlike Gaza, How to Survive a War Zone, Gaza Doctors Under Attack was aired by Channel 4 earlier this month, and it remains up on their website. And it's a good thing Channel 4 had the guts that the BBC lacked, because the film is vital viewing for anyone in any doubt over the depravity of Israel's treatment of Palestinians in Gaza. Using footage shot inside Gaza's hospitals, interviews with medical experts and doctors, as well as anonymous Israeli sources, the documentary presents a forensic case for the conclusion that Israel has deliberately targeted doctors and their families and used methods including humiliation, detention, and torture to decimate Gaza's health system. Much of that has been done out of sight of the world's eyes and far away from any kind of oversight. Over its 65-minute length, the film establishes a pattern of attacks on medical staff. The Israeli military picked a hospital. Shells and missiles land closer and closer as greater numbers of displaced Palestinians seek shelter in its grounds. Eventually, the building is struck and then placed under siege, then raided and its doctors detained. From there, many end up in black sites inside Gaza.
Following 3 of the hospital raids that we've investigated, we found that medics were taken to locations human rights groups have described to us as black sites, where there's no judicial oversight. Footage of the sites is rare, but this was filmed by a member of the IDF in a football stadium in Gaza City and was posted online in December 2023. We can't confirm if medics are in these images, but thousands of Palestinians have been taken to these sites, including medics.
Amnesty International researcher Budur Hassan explained what she'd learned about the Israeli military black sites in the enclave.
What are these black sites being used for? In these sites, the soldiers has absolutely complete power to abuse, to torture, to hit, to humiliate the detainee without any oversight.
What can you tell me about the detainment of Palestinian doctors and healthcare workers?
So if there is one characteristic for which this war has stood out is the systematic targeting of the Palestinian healthcare sector in the Gaza Strip. We're not talking about 10, 20, 30, 40 healthcare workers. We're talking about hundreds of detainees. Israeli authorities would say that maybe these healthcare workers know some information about hostages, or they knew information about Hamas fighters being treated. But on many occasions, these doctors are probably interrogated just once or twice, and that's it. The torture and unlawful treatment to which healthcare workers are subjected is evident intent of the Israeli authorities to destroy Palestinians. So there is also an element of genocidal intent. And destroying the healthcare sector, basically taking it out of service through different means, not always necessarily by directly attacking them, but by also detaining hundreds of healthcare workers.
Budur says she's identified at least 4 black sites so far. So do you think there are other black sites that you haven't heard about, that you haven't been able to identify?
I think what we were able to identify is just a drop in an ocean of horror.
Some of Gaza's doctors have also suffered extreme violence before they're detained. On December 3rd, 2023, a direct airstrike hit the family home of Dr. Khaled Hamouda. No other building was hit, just his home. 10 of his family were killed, many of them doctors. But Hamouda escaped with his 2 daughters, son and wife. With the 5 of them running to shelter outside another building further up the road, that's when a drone strike hit.
My family and I, my wife and my children, we were attacked at that very moment. I have no doubt it was intentional.
Khaled Hamouda was injured. He was taken to Kamal Adwan Hospital.
I was shocked to see one of the nurses who I worked with carrying my daughter. She was carrying my daughter Reem, and she was dead. That was the moment I knew she had been killed. I recognized her from her clothes. I asked the nurse to come closer so I could see her face. She asked if I knew her. I said, yes, she's my daughter. My daughter, she said. She was dead on arrival. My wife's body was retrieved from the street, and I was told the following morning that I lost my wife too.
The 2 strikes killed 12 members of Khaled Hamouda's family, a family of doctors.
I don't know where they were buried. I never saw them again.
After he'd recovered from his injuries, Hamouda sought shelter in the grounds of his workplace, the Kamal Adwan Hospital. It too was bombarded, besieged, then raided, and he was detained as well. Hamouda says that after 8 hours of beatings, he was transferred to Israel. There, he says, he was held in stress positions and on one occasion was forced to grip barbed wire. After 3 weeks, he was released without charge. One of the most notorious of those Israeli prisons is Sdet Teman. Gaza Doctors Under Attack spoke to an Israeli doctor who worked at the prison's field hospital about the treatment of Palestinian prisoners.
I remember at least one case where a very painful procedure was being done and the patient got no consent. Things were not explained to him in his language, so he didn't know what was going on. And to the best of my knowledge, no painkillers were administered to him around that procedure, and I was there. I saw that happening, and I saw him screaming. And I saw no one stopping it.
Why do you think this was happening? Why weren't they using anesthetic on this patient?
Well, I think that was retribution. Like that was a way to inflict pain. So the scary part is how I could not recognize that. When I saw that, and I recognize how I have normalized the fact that even those patients are defined and are called just by a 5-digit number. They don't have a name, they don't move. They're blindfolded, so you do not look at them in the eyes. So you're taking a lot of the humanity and the empathy that you might feel away. So there is no doubt that, in many ways, I am an accomplice as well as an Israeli physician to how we have been treating Gazans.
Were you given any guidelines, or were you briefed about the parameters within which you could work?
The only guidelines that we see is about, like, keeping ourselves anonymous. Just because they wouldn't want their names coming out to, let's say, foreign countries and foreign journalists just because they might be liable, potentially, of war crimes.
What happens if you speak out?
Well, I might be viewed as a traitor.
So in this atmosphere where people are scared to speak out, do you think this is causing a cover-up?
I don't even think that in the Israeli society, there is a need for cover-up these days. You can do almost whatever you want when it comes to Gazans. Honestly, I think that's how the Israeli society has been dehumanizing Palestinians for years. It didn't start on October 7th. It's nothing new.
Targeting hospitals and medical workers are both crimes under international law. Yet Israel has been repeatedly able to do both with impunity. But what is its aim in carrying out these attacks? Researcher Dr. Laithan Bali, who has been tracking the targeting of medical workers in Gaza, has a theory.
So the Israeli army claims to use precise strikes in order to target identified either terrorists or terrorist infrastructure, and that it aims to minimize unintended casualties. And so whether it's because the Israeli army has deliberately chosen to assassinate those individuals, or because it doesn't care that it kills them and it considers them collateral damage, it has made a choice to kill them, whether it's collateral damage or whether it's assassination. The massive loss of expertise will take years to rebuild. Structures can be built very quickly, but healthcare professionals require years to be trained. And so that's going to have a massively detrimental effect on the health of the Palestinian population for years to come.
Kieran, this is obviously a story we've been covering quite closely on Novara Media, Israel's attacks on Gaza's healthcare infrastructure. But I'm wondering, what are the historical precedents for states deliberately targeting life-saving infrastructure, like hospitals and also the individuals that you need to run a healthcare system, like doctors and nurses?
There are, let me be clear, lots of instances of doctors being killed, medical professionals being killed, hospitals being destroyed in part or in whole in wars. And there are also instances in more modern wars of actually healthcare facilities and doctors and so on being targeted. But in the kind of the big wars of the 20th century, like, if you like, or the 19th century, the ones that we think of, the deliberate targeting of healthcare professionals and healthcare facilities shown to be evidenced clearly as deliberate, actually the examples are pretty scant. As I say, there's collateral damage and so on, but the evidence stacks up, but it's genuinely collateral damage in a way that obviously insults the intelligence in the context of Gaza, right? And this is why when we say that Israel is a pariah state, among other things, we're not just saying it to parrot what we've heard from, other people on the left or pro-Palestine activists or whatever. It's that Israel is behaving like a pariah or a rogue state in relation to how other states have behaved historically, even in war. And actually, Israel is a good example of a historical precedent. Israel's been doing this since before its inception. The Haganah, the Irgun and the Lehi, the paramilitary groups that later formed the IDF, that engaged in terrorism during the British Mandate against Palestinians in order to establish the state of Palestine, culminating in 1948 with the Nakba, they actually targeted medical facilities, Palestinian doctors, British doctors working there, and so on. And actually, my grandfather, I apologize to regular Novara listeners and viewers, because they probably heard me say this before. I don't want to keep banging on about my family, but it is directly relevant. My own grandfather, who was in the Nakba, was shot in the head by a Palmach paramilitary member, survived miraculously, was taken to a Red Crescent hospital on the outskirts of Jaffa, and was in a field hospital when 2 days later or thereabouts, the Palmach ambushed the hospital and tried to kill him in his hospital bed. He escaped again. And they killed medical staff on site working on behalf of the Red Crescent. Another example I can think of, and I'm giving these examples because it corroborates what we're saying or what I'm saying. It's a rogue state because states don't tend to do this as direct targeting. Another example were the French paramilitaries in Algeria, who targeted Algerians when the French were leaving Algeria in the early 1960s. They targeted hospitals, medical professionals deliberately and as a matter of record. And there's been, well, you mentioned the Geneva Convention. If you go back to 1871, you'll find the first instance of the Red Cross having a presence in a war. And that was the Franco-Prussian War. Red Cross professionals and staff felt comfortable going out into the field and treating French and German soldiers because there was an agreement in advance, a pact, that if you were wearing the Red Cross uniform, you would not be targeted. That's going back to 1871, and actually it formed the basis of what became the Geneva Conventions on not attacking medical staff. So in every conceivable sense, whether it's lining up with paramilitaries, historically including its own paramilitaries, whether it's breaking with what states have tended to do, going all the way back into the middle of the 19th century, a savage age, supposedly. But of course, the Israelis completely outstripping that in their conduct in Gaza. In every single one of those senses, it becomes, I think, undeniable that what's going on is not a war, because if it were a war, you would expect typical war rules of engagement, but actually, as we've been saying all along, an extermination, a systematic extermination, a genocide, in other words, in which the typical rules of engagement around medical professionals and hospitals and so on are not obeyed or abided to.
I think you make a really important point, and it's one which is relevant for our next story as well, which is just how arbitrary the designation of terrorist group or terrorist organization is. Because the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, the National Army of Israel, was literally formed out of terrorist organizations such as Irgun, such as Haganah, which carried out acts of terrorism, not just against the Palestinian people. Read up about the Deir Yassin massacre, those amongst our audience, if you haven't heard about it before. Some of the details are truly, truly harrowing. But also committed acts of terrorism against the British forces who were stationed there as well, such as during the King David Hotel bombing. Now, British Israeli citizens are allowed to freely join the IDF, come back. They don't get questioned by the police for what they may have witnessed or participated in when it comes to war crimes. And yet Hamas is a proscribed terrorist organization. Now, as my colleague Michael Walker has said many times, things that Hamas has done, you can classify them as acts of terrorism, targeting civilian populations. The IDF has done that on a much larger scale. So there is only one side that we decide to designate as a terrorist organization. The other side, though it's literally formed of terrorist groups who killed British servicemen and British medics as well, as Kieran has pointed out. And though they terrorize civilians, the instances of torture, detention, I mean, what are they if not captives and hostages, gang rape? They're not terrorists. For the second week running, police have arrested demonstrators protesting against the government's designation of non-violent direct action group Palestine Action as a terrorist organisation. In London, dozens of protesters gathered in Parliament Square at 1 p.m. on Saturday. One group surrounded the statue of anti-apartheid activist and former South African President Nelson Mandela, holding signs that read, "I oppose genocide, I support Palestine Action." A second group sat beneath the statue of Mahatma Gandhi, also deliberately breaching counter-terror law by publicly expressing support for a proscribed terrorist organisation via cardboard signs. A short while later, dozens of Met Police officers formed a human barrier around the two groups of protesters, preventing journalists from getting anywhere near to them. Also, then, further officers moved in, making arrests. In total, 46 people were taken into custody. A great use of police time, as I'm sure you can agree. Most of the demonstrators surrendered to the police, allowing themselves to be escorted to waiting vans. But a few protesters offered passive resistance, lying down in the face of arrest. Many were older people, who groups of police then carried away to police vans. In total, 46 people were arrested in London, and it's reported that over 300 police officers were involved in the operation. That's 300 police officers needed to confiscate a few cardboard signs and drag away peaceful protesters, many of them pensioners. An action also took place in Manchester. That was the moment Manchester police barged through a group of peaceful protesters to begin carting other peaceful protesters away. Why? Because they, too, were holding signs that simply read, "I oppose genocide, I support Palestine Action," in violation of the Terrorism Act. 16 Manchester protesters were arrested. In Cardiff, 13 people were arrested, including this 83-year-old man. That's after protesters gathered outside the offices of BBC Wales, again holding signs reading, "I oppose genocide, I support Palestine Action." In total, over 70 people across the country were arrested under counter-terrorism laws on Saturday, all for holding signs. Now, those three protests were organised by Defend Our Juries, a group whose aim is to protect the right of juries to acquit defendants on grounds of conscience. That right is being increasingly eroded by our government and by the courts as part of a broader clampdown and criminalisation of dissent. And in each case, the group sent letters to the police ahead of their actions to alert them to the protesters' intention to break the law. Some independent protests took place over the weekend, protesting the prescription of Palestine Action, but they got a more mixed police response. In Derry, in the north of Ireland, veteran civil rights activists gathered in the Guildhall Square to protest the ban of Palestine Action. They also held "I oppose genocide, I support Palestine Action" signs in contravention of the law. But no arrests were made in Derry, perhaps given the sensitivities of making mass arrests in a largely Irish nationalist city in the north of Ireland over the weekend of the 11th and 12th of July. Individuals also protested the prescription of Palestine Action. In Kendal, this man displayed his support for Palestine Action, but despite having notified the police in advance, he was left alone. Meanwhile, in Scotland, a man believed to have been wearing this shirt was arrested. It was sold by the Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign, and it reads, quote, "Genocide in Palestine, time to take action." Kieran, I bet you feel safer knowing that these, older gentlemen and ladies have been dragged off by police into, the gaping mouths of their police vans.
It's an incredibly serious topic, but I like to think it's a result of the seriousness that I have the Jose Mourinho interview in my head. The famous, "I cannot talk. If I talk, I will be in trouble." That's what I have on repeat in my head whenever I think about this topic. So I'll just pivot to one thing that I think is relevant, but that is safe for me to say, which is when I worked in Tower Hamlets for the local authority, around the time of October 7th and for about 5 months afterwards, Palestinian flags were going up all across the borough, deep in communities towards the east of the borough and towards the west of the borough, all throughout the borough. And we were under tremendous pressure from senior council officers, from the police, and from the Israel lobby, in the form of the Jewish Chronicle, in the form of UK Lawyers for Israel and others who kept sending us waves and waves of letters telling us that we must take these flags down. Otherwise, we'd be in terrible trouble, legal trouble. And we took the view that if we did go into those communities and take those flags down, that 5 more would appear the following day. A, that it was a hydra-headed problem, in other words, but also that it was totally wrong to destroy, if you like, to kind of upend organic expressions of solidarity from communities across the world. What business did we have doing that? And in the end, unfortunately, they were taken down. But the point I'm making in relation to the prescribed Palestine Action is that one of the key things we said when we made the decision not to take the flags down, is that it's going to become unenforceable. And by being unenforceable, it is going to be an endless drain on public money and public resources. And I suspect that eventually the police and all of the relevant authorities, and even maybe the political class, who knows, will have the same epiphany several months or years down the line.
I mean, look, one thing that I will say about this, because I am allowed to say this, is that we all have a sense of what terrorism is. It's action that threatens people's lives. It makes people feel frightened. It makes them feel worried about their safety. And that fear is the mechanism used by a terrorist group to pursue its goals, whether it's a religious goal, whether it's a political goal, or anything else. I find it very, very difficult to believe that any of what Palestine Action did, whether it was the actions they took at Elbit or whether it was the action taken at Bryce Norton, made people feel fear. Now, I accept that people should be held criminally responsible and it should go to a fair jury trial. But in my mind, it's simply not terrorism. It's not terrorism to do these things. And I would say the same thing were it a right-wing group or anybody else. It should not be classified as terrorism. That's got a specific meaning because legally now, we're forced to watch our every word because, we're worried that, the likes of UK Lawyers for Israel and Campaign Against Anti-Semitism will try and, knock on us to the cops. I bet you're watching. So hi, guys. I hope you enjoyed the show. Similarly, Kieran, I hope you enjoyed the show, seeing as you were such an active participant in it.
Well, it was our first outing and it didn't disappoint. I'm a million degrees. I apologize for everyone who's had to look at me sweating and bright red, but I'm going to now go and try and cool down. Thanks for having me, Ash.
It's going to be like Carlos Alcaraz yesterday at Wimbledon with the icy scarf. I really, really could do with an icy scarf right now. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Come back tomorrow for another live stream from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.